v.h.s.x? What do you mean?
All right, everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Today I wanted to talk about MIntSkull's video discussing if DVD has gotten much harder. And I have a couple of points that I want to talk about within that topic, because it is a varied topic. It is a lot to discuss when covering something like that. So first of all, that I want to mention that has actually been discussed, and I possibly debunked. I actually did cover this in a Choi video that I had actually discussed in the past. Actually, I think I can probably link that at the end. Or so Nightlight having a higher escape rate out on the surface actually does not seem very good overall for the killer players. I think the biggest concern, I would say, with something like that is the idea that the devs are stating that it is not accurate. Now, we are also fully aware that the devs have in the past and many times have stated that, or at least from what we've noticed, they don't necessarily release a lot of information in terms of their data. I don't think at all. I think that they really are very deliberate with what they talk about. They're very deliberate with what kind of data they release. And as spoken about in the Choi video, they actually haven't put out like the Swift information, I think, since 2019. So we are very behind in terms of even data about Swifts and stuff like that. So I can only imagine that they are keeping track of everything, but they're not going to give us that information. But to outright say that it isn't true, I mean, I would say it might be debatable. Who knows? We definitely won't know for sure. And we're still just kind of going off anecdotal evidence. And as we've even stated in the Choi video, I don't think that they're going to want to release something like that. So the next thing I want to say is that I do agree that the healing meta is back, and that is bad for killer players. And what do I mean by that? Now, I know that the counterpoints that you usually hear from survivors is that somehow killer is somehow been buffed all this time, and it really just somehow doesn't matter, and killers are so strong, and yada yada. But there's way too much nuance to discuss with something like that. But obviously anybody who's played killer for more than a match at the more often than just playing every once in a while will understand that MMR does work in this game. You know, MMR does function. You know, if you don't play the side, you're not going to see the strongest opponents compared to people that do play very frequently and that do play that side more often than not. So I would honestly believe a killer main a lot more quickly about the killer experience than a survivor main that plays a killer an hour every 2 weeks or something like that. So the buffs that we're talking about is definitely botany. We're talking about resurgence. We're talking about all the I think even you could consider the Yoichi perk that gives you like that aura reading and like an additional 30% or something for people in range and stuff like that. Like, it's old botany is basically making its return, and we need to sort of batten the hatches and get ready, because we need to start applying some perks here to actually be able to counter these things. It's unfortunate that the healing meta is sort of returning, because M1 killers still keep getting drop kicked in every single update when they drop a new meta. And I think the only time we've ever seen like the opposite, where like a killer meta was crazy, I think in recent memory, was the totems, which was great for like the week that it existed. You know, unfortunately it disappeared as quickly as it sprouted. And the biggest, I think, issue that I have with metas that sort of arrive with this game is that they don't necessarily let killer metas actually last compared to how long that survivor metas have lasted. The dramaturgy finesse meta has been in the game for a very long time, hasn't slowed down. Now we're starting to get into a heal speed meta that hasn't been changed at all. But when slugging started to kind of pop up, that was nerfed. Or like when the totem started to get a little bit better, that got nerfed. It's a damn shame. You know, I really don't understand entirely why that is always consistently the logic when it comes down to the balancing. It just kind of seems like they are very focused on just trying to keep a lot of the survivor metas in the game, from my perspective. I don't entirely know if that is the truth or not, but it definitely feels that way. probably isn't that way, but so that's just purely anecdotal and not really based out of reality. So let me know what you guys think on that in the comment section. But at least from my perspective, the healing meta is very bad for the vast majority of killers. Ghostface at least has a fighting chance in this situation. He does have like making survivors exposed at least means that you don't have to really think about them being healthy as much. You know, Myers is also a good example of that, and even furthermore can delete a survivor from the game with the Tombstone add-ons, which is good. But other killers that don't have that, Trapper or Skull Merchant or Clown or other characters like that, are, you know, going to take a very big hit because of it, and it's not super ideal, which is very unfortunate. Moving on to the next part, which is hit and run is now affected. So character even like Wraith catching a stray here is definitely not a good sign. Wraith, or anybody who participates in the hit and run playstyle, is also being affected by the healing speed buffs, and that in itself is not ideal, because one of the biggest issues that survivors do have is the fact that killer players don't really vary their builds much. They don't really vary their killers much. They usually are going against the A to S tiers, such as Kaneki, Blight, Wesker, Nurse, and stuff like that. And they complain that they're running the 4 slowdowns. They complain that they are using the same exact builds. And the thing is that with the changes that they're adding in, it only reinforces people to only stick with what is the strongest and what is the most easy to use. Especially because why, you know, like a really good example you could say even is like Kaneki shines even more now with the anti-heal, because he keeps everybody injured all the time. So it really is just a part of what he does, and it's a part of keeping his ability active in order to actually get your like 3 dashes and stuff like that. Blight also stays unchanged. Nurse will stay relatively unchanged. They're very chase focused. Wesker probably the same thing. And the thing is that these characters stay at the top, and then nobody really wants to play Ghostface or Clown or anybody else who's any low, like in the more like lower or mid level in terms of the tier list, because of that fact. It's much harder to even go for something like hit and run with characters that are as weak as they are. And then we also have to take into account that hit and run is something that people utilize with characters that are in the low tier. Like Wraith, I wouldn't consider as an S tier, but I wouldn't say he's an A tier either. Very mid level, and I would say that Wraith, being one of the best at doing hit and run, is now unable to do that, which means that it ties back into the idea that they're removing a lot of playstyles, and they're removing a lot of builds and build variety, which ends up leading back to people trying to use quad slowdown to slow the game down again and actually have normal casual games that aren't lasting only 5 minutes long. And that is the biggest issue that killer players as a whole are going to be facing because of it. So there is another addition here that maybe the new AFK pros have added to the gen rushing, because of the fact that with the weird changes with the AFK pros, maybe it's possible that that's what's led to the higher efficiency overall, and that possibly could be adding on to the healing buffs potentially. That those probably are working hand in hand to actually just make the game objectively increasingly harder for killer players, and that could be a possibility as to why it's so difficult. And as somebody who plays mainly the low tiers, this is not good, you know? Like, Ghostface at least has a fighting chance by making people exposed, so if they are trying to heal underhook and you can at least 99 both of them or mark one of them and stuff like that, you at least have that as an option. You know, considering a character like Springtrap is also not really considered the best, I would say that might also like add into the idea that it does make it a lot harder for a lot of players as well, because Springtrap doesn't necessarily I wouldn't say as strong as the higher tier killers in the game. I wouldn't say is the like best killer in the game, like compared to Blighted Nurse and stuff like that. So I think that despite the fact that the doors is a form of map traversal, I do believe that it does mean that they are going to be able to instantly heal. They are going to be able to still do what they want to do within this new meta, and that is not ideal. Now, another point that MIntSkull had mentioned in his video is that the go next prevention is leading to more issues. So I do also agree with that point, pointing out that the go next prevention means that there's going to be a lot of people that are, I would even consider like within like the average, I would say like within the average, within like the lower tiers of MMR and stuff like that, I think are both going to have a rough time, especially when a lot of the lower tier players usually are the ones to quit the most, I think. At least from my perspective, I usually don't see anybody who's really good at the game quit unless they, unless it was followed with teabagging initially, or like super cocky players that get folded immediately. Then I know, okay, for sure, we know that they are blatantly just like giving up because they were just, they got humbled or something like that. But in terms of everybody else, I would say like the vast majority, I think, are probably going to have rougher games because you can't get as many hook states from people that do quit. And I do think that that because the quitting was such a prevalent issue since even then, I think that was also causing a big problem, which I think that might have contributed to some people's wins because of the fact that they just ended up giving up immediately on the vast majority. So that means that the go next, as an issue was consistent for a vast majority of people for a good amount of time, to where now it like kind of normalized their games for themselves and it kind of felt a bit normal. And that was a new norm. And then now, because they can't quit anymore, they're going back to the gens, and then it objectively is harder because maybe people are used to that, which that would make a lot of sense. Now, I will say though, is that besides even that, now we're getting a lot of survivor buffs, and the survivor buffs are now starting to be seen by everybody. Like with each patch we have gotten, people are starting to notice, hopefully I would assume, that survivors have been getting a lot of buffs. And I was really considering making a video covering each and every patch up to this point, quickly, to cover like just trying to count like who has more buffs and who's had more nerfs, to try to end the debate in a way, which is a very tall task to ask for, but it is a possibility that it could solve the sort of debate and the brain rot of, oh, killers are getting buffed like crazy when they really haven't been. And I will say that we finally actually have a brand new patch that's actually buffing killers. In this next patch coming up, we're actually buffing these characters that have needed changes for quite a while. I mean, Pig is a perfect example of that, who has needed buffs for years. Pyramid Head, who has needed an add-on pass for years. Perfectly fine with that. We're finally starting to see something. But on top of that, we also have been getting a chain of survivor buffs from the past couple of buffs that have really hit very hard in terms of the low tiers, with the healing buffs that they've been doing back to back. So, objectively, at least within this couple of months, because DVD kind of goes in waves, but with this one, it was a bit of a low point where we were just getting a lot of the survivor buffs, and it's been leading to a lot of just bad times for the low tiers. So with these new buffs that the survivors keep getting, it ends up making the killers sweat even more, and then objectively, it ends up making the survivors saltier, you know what I mean? And then it just gets them more angry, which then makes them cry more, and then that'll obviously end up leading to more killer nerfs, and the usual routine that we kind of have seen up to this point. And I feel like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the fact of the matter is, like, if we keep trying to nerf a bunch of stuff on the killer side, that makes people that, which I've said before, like, people will always go for the path of least resistance. So if people are constantly going to get nerfs to their favorite characters that are lower tier, they're just either not going to play killer, or they're just going to play the higher tiers to even play the game in the first place. This is also why strategies end up getting used a lot more by the lower tiers than they probably need to do as the higher tiers. And we've seen that obviously like a good channel that I would say that kind of displays that is definitely Druss and Bubba, who mains Pig, who utilizes many different strategies in order to actually be able to win with one of the weaker killers in the game. You know, I usually name off like Trapper, Ghostface, and Skull Merchant, but I always forget Pig. You know, I always forget Pig. I always thought that Pig was a little bit above the D tiers, like the very low tier. I figured they were just like a little hair above it because of the fact that they did have those head traps and ambush, but even then they're so purely M1 just like the others, and probably deserve to also be in the low tier as well. But anti-slugging is also coming to DVD as well, so we're gonna see. You know, we're gonna see how it goes. I might talk about it, but it's pretty obvious to guess that it is just a very bad time. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube things for me, man. And I'll see you guys in the next video.